Well, I'm sure we all agree with this fact. In recent years, there have been a lot of changes.
Oh, Jeff, that's an understatement, if anything. Geoffrey Jackson is here in the annual meeting to justify all of the new changes in this religion. This religion, with its new country songs, new dress and grooming rules, no preaching hourly requirements, and a lowering of standards for all kinds of free labor for the religion, from Bethelites to elders, has nothing to do, at least cosmetically, with the formal religion it was a mere 15 years ago. And instead of admitting that this religion was imperfect and needed changes, Jeff is here to gaslight all of us into thinking this religion was moving towards all of those changes all along.
Even since the last annual meeting, there have been many changes. Some of them perhaps are a little surprising or may seem to be sudden. But you know, brothers and sisters, when we look back on how these changes have come, we can see that Jehovah has gradually prepared us for each of these adjustments and changes.
See, they were all going to happen inevitably. And Jeff is going to start by giving us an overview of the changes that were apparently always going to happen. Let's recap all of the changes with him.
What changes have we seen with regard to our understanding of Bible teachings? At the 2021 annual meeting, we received an adjusted understanding of John 5:29. It was explained that the resurrection of judgment will not be a judgment of condemnation. Rather, it will be more like a period of probation. The unrighteous mentioned at Acts 24:15 will have an opportunity to gain everlasting life, but their names will not be written in the book of life at the time of their resurrection. To have their names eventually written in that book, these ones will need to respond positively to the great educational work that will take place during the 1,000-year reign.
And that was the first change. Now, everyone who died before Armageddon will get resurrected and given the opportunity to trade their lives of conquistadors or Native Americans and become Jehovah's Witnesses or go back to being dead. They never mention how the people who don't want to be Jehovah's Witnesses will be killed off, though. Do they just disappear, kind of like they just appear into existence already? Or do we all get to celebrate Yahweh the good old times way with a little bit of blood sacrifices?
Then at the annual meeting in 2023, we gained enhanced insight into what we do know and what we don't know concerning Jehovah's judgments. We learned that the door of opportunity for people to take a stand for the kingdom does not shut when the Great Tribulation starts with the destruction of false religion. At that time, perhaps some will be like the Egyptians in Moses' day, who took a last-minute stand and joined the exodus of God's people.
This was the stupidest change that Jehovah's Witnesses have ever made to their cult. Because when you're in a cult, all of the rewards you promise as a cult to your followers have to come true in the vague future that will never come, that or after they die. That way, they'll never know that they wasted their lives for nothing because they haven't died nor been to the future yet. However, this change says that as soon as all of the governments in the world come together to go after Jehovah's Witnesses right after deleting every religion on earth, just as Jehovah's Witnesses have predicted they will, you too can repent and come into the religion. There is no need to be a good or exemplary Jehovah's Witness anymore, as long as you come back in halfway through the end of the world.
At the same annual meeting, we adjusted our views with regard to Jehovah's judgments of those who died in the flood and those who were destroyed in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Oh, yeah, the second stupidest change they've made. Now, the people got killed in the flood and in Sodom and Gomorrah may actually deserve to come back to life because they didn't deserve to be killed by God in the first place. Because now Jehovah is kind of an idiot like that.
Also at that annual meeting, an adjustment was made regarding the reporting of our time and activity in our preaching work. Instead of focusing on reports, we try to make good use of every opportunity to witness.
Yep, after generations of millions of Jehovah's Witnesses being judged by how much time they spend in the futile door-to-door ministry, The witnesses were so done with the door-to-door canvassing efforts that the leadership decided witnesses now just needed to mark a thing that it says that they preached that month to be considered an active member of this religion. A loving change that lovingly came over 30 years late, since they've spent all of this time doing an antiquated form of book selling. The only reason why they started doing this in the first place, 3 decades after they stopped selling books.
Then we received the 2024 Governing Body Update, number 2. In that update, we saw the need to adjust how we interact with those who have committed serious sins and have been removed from the congregation.
Yeah, now if you're being disfellowshipped, people can talk to you to invite you to the meetings and to say hi to you at the meetings. As long as you're not an apostate like me, though. Apostates like me still get fully shunned. How loving!
What other major adjustments have we recently seen? In our preaching work, the emphasis now is on starting Bible studies and making disciples, not on distributing literature. To that end, the focus is on starting meaningful conversations, not just on using memorized presentations.
What? This is the worst attempt I've ever seen from this cult to rewrite history. Well, maybe I've seen this year, let's say. The purpose has always been on generating Bible studies. They literally just mentioned the explosive growth they had decades ago in this annual meeting. It's just that before, the approach was to get Bible studies through the publications, because that way you could sell them the publication and study it with them to indoctrinate them into selling more publications for your cult. Now, the cult is just to try and find people to indoctrinate by showing them videos door to door or by standing next to a cart. And it is very obviously not working out. But their shift didn't change. They just changed the way they got people to agree to a Bible study from a method that works sometimes to a method that pretty much never works.
Were you surprised by these adjustments? Perhaps so. But as we look back, we see how one adjustment in understanding gradually helped us with the next adjustment. Isn't it true that gradually Jehovah has prepared us? And when we look back on it, we see how logical this training has been to refine our understanding.
What? How? No, seriously, how does the change of doctrine on what will happen to resurrected people in paradise have to do with the reduction in hours? How did the new understanding of people being able to repent during the Great Tribulation prepare Jehovah's Witnesses to focus on Bible studies now? Jeff is saying that one leads to the other, and most Jehovah's Witnesses will believe him without realizing that this is a lie. The only thing that all these changes have in common is that they all came because the governing body decided. That's it. But Jeff is about to spout some hate language in a way only a coward like him could.
But events in the world likewise have changed. It's true, sometimes in the world you have sudden changes, for example, the pandemic. But oftentimes, change in the world is gradual. Isn't it true with regard to the view of morality, homosexuality, abortion, even what's acceptable and not acceptable with regard to conduct? All of that has happened gradually in the world. And it's not until you look back and see how different the world is today with regard to those matters that we see that there have been a lot of changes.
I swear there are no cowards like the members of the governing body. They know that they would get in hot water if they said what they really believe in, that nobody should be able to get abortions, be anything but a straight man or woman saving yourself for marriage, or to behave fruity or in any way that's not how a Jehovah's Witness would behave. If Jeff said here, the world is degrading because now they think being gay is okay instead of deserving discrimination like before, the world would see him for the hateful bigot he is. Instead, by using this careful wording, he signals to every one of his followers through red herrings the things he's too afraid to say out loud, and yet expect Jehovah's Witnesses to not just say that out loud, but abide by those words, even when it comes to shunning their own queer children. This is some of the most disgusting things the governing body does every day. It's one thing to believe that gay people shouldn't exist, but even if you believe that, you should still look down on Geoffrey Jackson when he uses red herrings instead of saying what he actually believes in with his chest. Why? Well, because he knows that if he said what he believes in out loud, plenty of governments will realize that this religion goes against freedom of sexuality and beliefs, and therefore does not deserve the religious or charity status that it has. That wouldn't mean that the religion would be illegal necessarily, but it would definitely mean that the religion would have to pay taxes, and that would affect Geoffrey Jackson personally. Therefore, he is a coward and uses red herrings to say the things he expects Jehovah's Witnesses to live by and say out loud. Regardless of whether you are normal or a homophobe like Jeff, you have to admit that Jeff is nothing but a coward when he says things like these, just like the rest of the governing body. And a dumbass who just realized the changes he has made to this religion breaks the religion.
But this can be dangerous because as things gradually change, we may get used to gradual change and forget that there are some sudden changes about to occur. That we can't just sit back and think, well, things are gradually going to develop, we know which way it's going, and maybe it's not going to happen yet. You know, we've got a little bit more wiggle room there with regard to the schedule. But you see, that's dangerous thinking.
That's only dangerous thinking for the governing body, because Jehovah's Witnesses are realizing that the changes this governing body has made to the cult break the cult by giving them exactly what Jeff and the leadership don't want to give to their followers: the feeling that they have time. The governing body has to keep a sense of urgency for the followers because it's the greatest and almost only effective tool they have left to control them. But now they've told Jehovah's Witnesses that some unbelievers might have time to see the signs of the Great Tribulation and come into the cult before Armageddon. More than one Jehovah's Witness must have made the connection that if unbelievers who don't even keep up with the JW lore can see and recognize the signs of the Great Tribulation and still have time to convert and be saved, well, then every Jehovah's Witness will probably have that chance too. And since all other religions still exist in the world, well, that means that there's still some wiggle room. Geoffrey Jackson, who previously demonstrated his cowardice, is now demonstrating his stupidity by trying to convince Jehovah's Witnesses that the fact that him and his buddies changed the doctrine to inadvertently give all followers some wiggle room doesn't mean the wiggle room is there because raisins?
For example, our view with regard to the number of anointed ones remaining on the earth. Now, for many years, what did we think? We thought, well, that number will go down and down and down and down. Now, I don't know about you, but me, when that report came out, boom, just how many partakers? And what were we thinking? Well, probably, maybe we didn't say it, but we were thinking, the number will go down, 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 and there'll be just a couple of old guys in a wheelchair who will get their reward.
This is insane. There are probably videos by Jehovah's Witnesses that are making fun of this dumb belief the exact same way, and we're bashed by believing Jehovah's Witnesses for being disrespectful because Geoffrey Jackson is making fun of people for believing what the governing body told them to believe. Jehovah's Witnesses used to believe that the last anointed people were chosen in 1935, so there were pretty much no more people being anointed. They also believed that the generation of anointed people would be the generation that would not pass away without seeing the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, meaning the end of times and the restoration of an earthly paradise. That is why, in 1984, they even published this watchtower with a whole bunch of old people on the cover claiming that they would be the generation that would not pass away. They all have long passed away, but that's why Jehovah's Witnesses would look at those numbers, because the old age of this generation was used to convert people. They placed these old people on the cover being like, look, they're basically in wheelchairs, which means that the end is coming very soon when there's just a few of them left because they can't die until Armageddon comes. That's what the governing body of that time taught back then. And Geoffrey Jackson is making fun of that. What happened to all these changes seamlessly led to the next one charade, Jeff? If anyone at that point before this meeting made these comments, they would have been labeled as an apostate because they would have gone against what they used to teach. But we have Jeff making fun of a stupid Jehovah's Witness belief, and Jehovah's Witnesses are laughing along. Why? Well, because Jeff and the rest of the governing body are the only Jehovah's Witnesses who can never be apostates regardless of what they do or say as long as they remain in the governing body. That's why Jeff is the only one in this religion who can call their beliefs out for their stupidity. That being said, he's just making fun of previous beliefs, but him and the rest of the governing body have proved unable to come up with new beliefs that properly replace their old beliefs he's making fun of. Do you see how hard it is to debunk Jehovah's Witness propaganda, by the way? Jeff took a few seconds to say a lie that needed this much time to be debunked, and he's about to do it again.
Well, I'm exaggerating, but that was sort of the feeling, wasn't it? But now, what have we seen in recent years? Those numbers have gone up and up.
Yes, the numbers went up and up because when the generation that wasn't supposed to pass away passed away, they realized they needed to change up the doctrine. So in 2007, they admitted that there was no biblical basis to say that there were no new anointed people since 1935. And wouldn't you know it, more and more people started to believe that they were anointed since then. This didn't happen just because, out of context, like Jeff wants you to believe, or like this useless graph. But that's the only way this lying pig can convince his listeners of his very deliberate lies. He is lying to his followers, and his followers are eating it up, not realizing that Jeff is literally making fun of them.
And not only that, younger brothers have been appointed on the governing body. Now, I know what you're all thinking. 2 new ones, how old are they? We know. You're not Googling now, but you will be. But you see, we need to be careful about what we're thinking with regard to the number of anointed ones left on earth.
Younger brothers are being appointed to the governing body, yes, by themselves. That just happened, right, Jeff? You lying prick. How can this jerk say this stuff like he had nothing to do with the brothers being appointed? Why doesn't he say, and now we, the governing body, decided to appoint younger brothers to the governing body? How come Jeff doesn't want him and his buddies to take credit for this one, huh? He's pretty much lampshading doctrine at this point. You know, when something very ridiculous happens in a movie, so someone in the movie goes like, well, that's ridiculous. So your brain kind of cancels out your perception of how ridiculous something is. Yeah, he's doing that. He appointed younger people to the governing body, and he knows that this kind of breaks the doctrine. And instead of giving Jehovah's Witnesses at least an explanation, he's simply making fun of Jehovah's Witnesses for believing what they used to believe in. What will an even older Geoffrey Jackson will make fun of in 20 years? Not that someone with this amount of hate will live for another 20 years, but let's just say, will he make a joke about how some Jehovah's Witnesses believe that they respected life by dying instead of getting a blood transfusion? But why is he trying so hard to lampshade the topic of the new governing body and making fun of people who would look up their age? Well, because After the generation that would not pass away passed away, Jehovah's Witnesses shift to an overlapping generation teaching, which is the generation teaching that they believe in today. Now, it's not that the anointed people who lived to see the events of 1914 would not pass away before the fulfillment of the prophecy. It's basically the contemporaries of the anointed people who were alive in 1914 who would not pass away. Basically, the generation that would not pass away includes the people who were alive in 1914 and the people who they interacted with after 1914. So any anointed person that the generation that could not pass away had interacted with directly became the generation of anointed people that would not pass away. What does that have to do with this governing body? Well, the governing body is made up of only anointed people, which means that there is a cap on how young an anointed person can be. Under the new rules, someone can only be anointed if they were old enough to interact directly with the generation that saw the events of 1914. And how does that look like? Well, let's say that the youngest that a person could have been to see and understand the events of 1914 was a teenager, since that's what Jehovah's Witnesses believe in. That would mean that the youngest a person could have been to understand that they were interacting with someone who witnessed the 1914 events would have also been a teenager. Babies who were alive at the same time as someone who was a teenager in 1914 do not count, and neither do kids. Teenagers are where this religion has drawn the line. I believe because that's when you get baptized, and you kind of have to be baptized to be anointed. Traditionally, this is a generation of anointed people, remember. So we're stretching the doctrine to include teenagers, since I've never heard of a teenager who proclaims to be anointed, but we are giving them as much leeway as possible. The person who was a teenager in 1914 would have been born around 1900. If they lived to 95, they would have reached that age around 1995. Let's say that's the latest they can give out information, since very few people live past that date and no 96-year-old is giving classes to teenagers. If their youngest contemporary was a teenager when they interacted with this person in 1995, this person from the newer generation would have been born around 1980, assuming they were around 15 years old at the time. That means that according to Jehovah's Witness doctrine, the youngest contemporary today of someone who was a teenager in 1914 and lived to 95 would be someone born around 1980, making them around 44 years old today in 2024. That doesn't mean that there aren't people who proclaim to be anointed who are under 44 years old, but this cult has always said that there are some people with mental issues and such who proclaim to be anointed without being anointed, so the only way to properly be sure if someone is anointed is if they get appointed to the governing body, pretty much. And that is what Jehovah's Witnesses will be looking at the age of the new guys and getting disappointed because it sounds like Jeff made sure to delete all information of these new guys' birth dates before saying this, because they look to be pretty much the youngest you can possibly be to be anointed. Listen, that's super long, but if you want the TLDR, basically, the youngest governing body member can possibly be is around 44 years old, because that is the youngest any anointed person is supposed to be, according to the rules that Jeff is kind of making fun of. So, listen, this is a whole bunch of lies, and again, this is taking a lot of time, but let's just see if you can spot why I get so worked up with these lies and why I'm taking so much time to fully debunk them by watching this clip, and I'll immediately tell you afterwards like what I'm thinking of.
You see, 19 years ago, I was appointed on the governing body. Even I thought I was too young. Now they tell me I'm not so young anymore. But do we see the point? What does the Bible actually tell us with regard to this? Well, it doesn't say the number would just dwindle down to just having a few older ones left. No. The great crowd of other sheep will be judged on the basis of how they deal with Christ's brothers. So that means the faithful and discreet slave, as well as all the anointed throughout the earth, will continue to be active in doing the work and wanting and needing your support, right up until the time that suddenly they will be reassigned.
If you're anything like me, you were getting madder and madder at every stupid joke Geoffrey Jackson was making. Because this, between these stupid jokes at the expense of the people who truly believe the doctrine, is actually new light. Except it's the stupidest, most condescending new light we've gotten. Jeff is basically hinting towards a complete shift in the generation teaching. He just said that there will be a whole bunch of anointed people over and over and over again until the day where they are all raptured to heaven, whenever that might be. Not only is he making fun of the previous doctrine and the changes it went through, now he's seemingly dismissing the notion of an overlapping generation altogether. Now, I'm not sure if that's exactly what Jeff means. These speeches are usually written into Watchtower articles the year after, so we'll have to see the wording there. And that's because Jeff is more worried on making apostate jokes about his own previous beliefs than on explaining the new doctrine. That's how little the doctrine matters now. Once fresh new spiritual food baked up in Jehovah's oven, now it's reduced to the bottom of a joke by the same leadership that taught the doctrine as law for decades.
And isn't that what Matthew 24 verse 31 says? There'll be a gathering, the final gathering of the anointed from all different parts of the earth. So for us to think, well, there's some new ones on the governing body, they don't look too old. Maybe we've got a little bit extra time. No. Jehovah is making sure that the faithful and discreet slave is continuing to work and is effective right up until that time of reassignment.
See? What does this mean? The only thing I can decipher from this is that Jeff is saying that the governing body will keep appointing new members until they're raptured. That basically means they'll do it until they don't. This is nothing, but the light bulb of new light is still shining over Jeff's head.
The second subject we'd like to talk about is our view with regard to the start of the Great Tribulation, with the destruction of Babylon the Great. When we look through the scriptures, in Revelation chapter 16, what does it tell us? That the waters would gradually dry up. Yes, churches are losing support in some countries. For example, Europe. It wasn't that long ago that most nations in Europe were very religious. But now people are turning their backs on religion. But at the same time, when we look at Africa and South America, we see that religion still has a strong influence.
I have this theory that by religion, he means his religion in particular, because what he says definitely applies to his cult. After all, it wasn't too long ago that they were converting people in Europe and other Western countries left and right, when now the only growth is happening in Africa and South America, with Europe not only being stagnant, but even removing their religious status and giving them lots of trouble for their damaging beliefs. What other religion could Jeff possibly have in mind if it's not his own?
For God put it into their hearts to carry out his thought. Yes, to carry out their one thought by giving their kingdom to the wild beast until the words of God will have been accomplished. Now, what is this one thought? Well, up to now, we've said the one thought is their desire to turn on false religion. And we can understand that because the context is talking about the destruction of false religion. But you see, if you look back at that verse, what is the one thought? Now, this means we have to adjust our understanding. Another change.
He's about to get to the new light, but he's doing a terrible job at explaining what the old light was. They basically believed before the verse he read was about the United Nations becoming so powerful that it basically became the main power on earth. They came up with that one when the United Nations was first formed, because they used to like inserting big world events like that into their prophecies. Now that the United Nations has so little power, it even isn't capable of stopping genocide, which was pretty much the main thing it was supposed to be for. This prophecy sounds kinda ridiculous. That's why we need a new change. So, are Jehovah's Witnesses going to come up with ways to tie the carnage happening in Gaza and the current socio-political climate to a new shining Jehovah's Witness prophecy filled with pseudo-intellectual graphs and charts and Bible verses? Or is he going to do the only thing that him and the rest of the governing body seems to be able to do and just put a band-aid over the issue?
The one thought refers to the nations being willing to hand over power, their political power, to the scarlet-colored wild beast, the United Nations. Let me repeat it, because you're in shock now, and you need to write this down. Okay.
I'll repeat it, you condescending ape, because you didn't explain it properly, and you're literally just gonna repeat exactly what you said. The big change that he's being so patronizing about is that they now believe that the governments will one day magically decide to give up their powers to the United Nations so this Jehovah's Witness prophecy can come true. That's it. The UN isn't going to gain power incrementally. It's just going to get a whole bunch of phone calls from all leaders around the world handling the power over to them. Guys, really, spiritual food was never this stupid before, right? It at least had some levels of internal logic, right? Right? Am I coping here?
Now, why is that exciting? Well, the fact that nations will eventually turn on religion really isn't that surprising, is it? Gradually, we've seen that happening. And we say, yes, we see which way it's going. But what about nations empowering the United Nations, handing over their personal political power so the United Nations has more power? It has teeth, as it were. At the moment, it's like a toothless organization, isn't it? That seems unbelievable. No nation does that. But what is it that happens? It is an act of God. Jehovah puts that one thought into the minds of the nations. Yes, they will empower the United Nations so that the United Nations will be in a position to take action against false religion.
Why? Just because? Why does this mean that now? I'm telling you, this is increasingly stupid. Back then, if you heard something about the United Nations growing too powerful and wanting to wield that power against all religions, it at least made some sense because the United Nations was gaining power back then. The prophecy was pretty much just a slippery slope fallacy. Now we don't even have the comfort of a fallacy to explain this away. It's just going to happen because. And those are the changes that you shouldn't be surprised by according to the title of this speech. These stupid changes that they decided were going to happen because.
So, up to now, we've assumed these 10 kings, which represent all the political powers and governments in the world at the moment, that they did this during the last days by supporting, first of all, the League of Nations and then the United Nations. But now, what do we understand this to be, seeing we understand verse 17? Well, there will come a time when all political powers on earth, which includes many who have never been part of the 7 world powers, they will see that they need to collectively pool their power by giving it to the United Nations to try and solve some of the problems in the world. And they will rule, notice, what does it say, for 1 hour, just a short period of time. So this newly empowered United Nations, from that time on, will rule collectively for a short time, but it will enable them to destroy false religion and fight against Jesus and Jehovah's people. Now, isn't that exciting?
This is the new light that Jehovah's Witnesses are going to be learning on the annual meeting when it comes out to them. And it's so small and so convoluted. I am willing to bet that most people will not be able to tell you what the change is after hearing this. Seriously, if you know a Jehovah's Witness, ask them what they thought about this change when it comes out. I guarantee you know more about this than they ever will. And if you can have a conversation about it with them, you might actually be able to tactfully point out just how silly it all is. Maybe even make similar jokes to the one Jackson made and be like, oh yeah, you know, like there's other stupid beliefs that we have. Oh wait, do you still believe in this one? And the reason for this change isn't because they have a better explanation. They don't. It's simply because Jeff and the rest of the leaders know that you need to have urgency if you are in this cult. And by saying that the governments will all collectively simply decide to do this one day, he is hoping you get scared enough into fearing this impending Armageddon, regardless of how much you can see with your lying eyes that this Armageddon isn't coming. Before, everything was proof that Armageddon was near. Now, the lack of proof is proof that Armageddon is near.
But now we're back to our subject again. You see, gradually things happen. So we might say, well, yes, gradually I see Babylon the Great's losing influence in some places, maybe not yet. But don't expect that you'll see governments gradually wanting to give over power. They don't want to do that. It takes an act of God. Jehovah will put it into their hearts. This will occur with suddenness. Yes, then the Great Tribulation will start.
And that's what Jeff wants Jehovah's Witnesses to remember, that they should be anxious about the end, even when they can clearly see that it's not coming, as he keeps shouting his way into the end of his speech.
So what have we learned in our discussion? Well, yes, some things change gradually. But brothers and sisters, remember, there are some sudden things that are about to occur. Let's remember the two things as a reminder. First of all, the remaining anointed ones will suddenly be taken to heaven while they are still very active. The second one, Jehovah will suddenly move the nations to give their political power to the United Nations. So what's the takeaway? Don't be complacent. Don't think, oh, this is going to gradually change. No, some things won't gradually change. They will occur suddenly as acts of God. So be ready and don't be surprised by sudden change.
He said it. It's all about fear-mongering.
Thank you, Brother Jeff. You've given us much to think about. We'll probably have to watch that talk a few times to get all the points.
Not if you got to the end of this pitch with me, because I'm not nearly as bad as Geoffrey when it comes to explaining things. Hey, maybe I should be in the new governing body. It's not like there's an age requirement for being anointed now, apparently, maybe. But that's all for now. I'll be breaking down the annual meeting moment by moment with this and other future videos, so subscribe if you don't want to miss out, and join my Patreons and YouTube supporters if you want to watch these as soon as they are ready.